Dobro večer i dobrodošli na književni razgovor sa Viniciusom Jatobom iz Brazila. I ja ću u ovom trenutku preći na engleski. So Vinicius is a Brazilian writer, playwright, short story writer, playwright, film critic and literary critic who comes from Rio de Janeiru but has spent a few years in Europe now, sometime in Paris, sometime in Germany, and he's now at the artistic residency of Poland here in Zagreb. Welcome to Booksi, and thank you for coming here.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for everyone for coming.
So most of the people here have to do professionally with literature or with criticism, and I thought that we would kind of steer the discussion in that direction. But my colleague Sarah did an interview with you last week that was published in Booksi, and there you said a very curious thing that I would like to start with. You mentioned that the novel, that you are suspicious of the novel as a genre. So I would like you to maybe elaborate on that. Tell us something about that suspicion and tell us about the forms or genres that you write in.
First, good night, everyone. And I feel that's very tricky to start a conversation because it seems that everyone understands that the novel is the last step of development in artistic talent to any writer. But the first thing that I can tell is that, of course, we have great artists like Javier Marias, Pat Patterson, writing novels that are engaging, sophisticated, make you feel and think things that you would not think the other way around. You think differently when you read them, but at the same time, if you go to the bestseller lists of any newspaper, you will find out that you never find Javier Marias there, but what you find in the fiction section is novels that were written by porno actors, singers, ex-athletes, socialites, and retired newspapers, journalists. So I don't think that to write a novel, you really need that level of artistry to start with. I think that novel can be written by anyone in this regard. And the way the publishing house work, we can really push a manuscript out to 100 pages, and the editors will write, will help you, so you can format a novel. And also most of the novels, they read like movies, like film scripts. So I'm suspicious about the novel, first to challenge the hierarchy of the novel and the discussion of forms. And when I decided to do my master degree, my PhD, I remember also that every time you told that you want to write an essay, a paper on a short story, a children's book, even poetry, it would sound like you don't want to put the effort on researching, and you really don't want to delve yourself into going through a lot of research. You want to make it easy for yourself. And I think that the first aspect that I want to challenge when I talk is sometimes provocative, sometimes as a joke, or sometimes serious, is this status of the novel as the main, the apex of literary expression, which I don't think it is, because if you see, like 2 years ago, the bestseller in the Frankfurt Book Fair was a novel written by a pornographic actor. So you see, like a novel is something that people do because they can't do. Also, in an artistic level, I think that the novel does not satisfy me as a way of expressing our experience, because I think that the way we talk to other people about what happens to us is really about concentration. So we don't expect to have 3-4 days from other people's life to tell one story. We really have to go to the scene, moment, reflection, thought that really concentrate and distillate the most experience that you had. And I think that novels are very artificial, because if you read even great novelists like Ian McEwan, for him to make that experience a novel, he has to go through a lot of scenes and descriptions that the book would work without. So I think that the novel has this situation. It has, like what Virginia Woolf said, a lot of corridors. It's a house that's not natural because it has more corridors than rooms. So a novel can be 2 rooms, have 2 rooms and 15 corridors. And how do you get to the rooms, and how do you use the corridors? So this is one of the aspects that I feel. And also I'm very interested in the human voice, how the human voice works, and naturally the way the novels use language. They are not really using vernacular and orality in a way that I feel that I look in the word to feel experience of listening to other people's stories. But of course, I have a great love and passion for novels. I read novels all the time. And I like to research and to go to medieval, long books before the modern novel, and have pleasure with the Cameron Bocage, have pleasure with the chivalry novels, have pleasure with Don Quixote. That's a really novels that work as collection and selections and anthologies of stories, because you go from one place to another place. You describe the character going into this travel, and then he stops, and then he talks to someone. And sometimes there are 3 chapters that are just about this story that someone's listening, someone's telling, and then you move with the character. So I think that this is my life with books led me to this position.
You were mentioned as one of the 10 best writers by Granta magazine in 2012 in Brazil, and your story Still Life was translated into English and published by Granta magazine, and I had the chance to read it. So what you're talking about now is that, I mean, you opted out to write short stories and plays However, when you talk about a short story in this way, the still life that I read reads quite differently, and so I would like to hear from you. How do you approach writing a short story, and what is the language that you want to research? Just to introduce the short story, Still Life is short story written in one sentence that is divided into two scripts, one italic and one normal font. I don't know what is the English word for that, but so the story, one story is told from in each form from different characters, but also those characters speak in italic script, but they are all speaking in italic script, all speak in each form, but they are discontinued, their speeches are discontinued by the narrative. I wouldn't even say a story, the narrative of the inanimate object. So it's a kind of a collage of different voices, but all these different voices write in one sentence. So everything is in one sentence, which I find quite interesting procedure. So yeah, my question would be, how do you approach the short story, and how do you think about it when you are actually writing it?
Yeah. Well, so let me tell something about this story of Still Life. Was a novel called The House that I started writing when I was 20 years old, and for 1 year and a half, I wrote it. It was really this novel that someone crossed the street, opened a door, and then got a coffee, drank the coffee, and then had conversations, and he said, she said, he said, she said, and this for 200 pages of manuscript. And suddenly, I started to get bored with my own story, because I thought everything that I tell you about the novel, I discovered that I dislike writing this novel. But I like the characters, I love their conflicts, and I felt, what's really essential about this story? And then I come to this moments of truth, or of conflict, of awakening that they have. And my idea was to write almost 80 years of a house from this, they buying the how can I say, the land,
The plot.
and until the house is empty. And of course, 80 years of the story of a family. And something happened. I went to a show in Rio, and for the first time, I was in a sound sculpture. The first time I ever experienced a sound sculpture in my life. And I was walking, and there were like these voices, and they were like this, and I fell in love, and I felt this is what I had to do with Still Life. I can just really just use the voices, and then I can just really, as an installation, describe things that are important to these people in the house, and construct the whole narrative, and just go from one moment to another moment, and use like key moments of the history of Brazil, like the assassination of Getúlio Vargas, the dictatorship at 64, to just really gives a timeline to a very slim and very timeline to events of. And then I experimented that. I really feel it was, for me, it was like, because writing for me is really about passion, and then I felt that the world was open to me, in enriching ways, because I was seeing things that I never saw before for writing this story, and just have this concentration of doing what I was trying to do in 200, because I stopped at 200 pages, but it could go longer in 37 pages, and I just discovered that, and that was a technique that I started using in other stories. With other set of characters, but in other stories, and that's what happened.
So the concentration of time, or the individual moments in which the time is tense, in a way, is what triggers the story, or is it a character? Is it the language? Where do you enter the story? How do you enter it?
I enter the story when two characters, they discover something together. So when the father and the mother, and the boy and the mother, when they discover something together, that's where I feel, for example, in this moment where the dog dies, and the children wants to keep playing with the dog, and the father says that the dog is going to sleep forever, and so he starts thinking about this idea of sleeping forever, and then they go with the dog and throw the dog in the river. You know? So this is a moment of relationship that between them that will mark their life.
But is it then safe to say that it's the situation that triggers the creative nerve in you when you're about to write a new work?
I have a notebook. I have notebooks, and I just make notes of images that I have, sentences, and then I start to speculate around that, and I just free my mind to let everything that could possibly happen to happen, and then someday I discovered the first line of the story, and I discover if it's a short story or it's a theater. I just discovered with this first line.
How do you discover that? I mean, you also talked about it, that something that is a play cannot be a short novel or a short story, and vice versa. So can you explain that? How do you know what it's going to be? What is it that makes it different? What is in the first line that makes it a short story or a play?
It's like this. It's an energy that pushes your whole body to passion, to fever, and then you have fever, and then you go with the fever, like, because until you're just collecting things, like collecting one color, one image, one reference of a book, and then you remember that verse that you love. You just keep accumulating that. But until you don't have this spark of passion, you can't put everything together. So that energy pushes you to do something that for me is a performance of the text. And you get very emotional, and then you just go with the flow of the text. And then it's really a fever, like for 5-6 days I do nothing but to write. I forget about almost everything that I do, and I just go with writing. And then 5 days, 6 days later, I have this story. I worked 1 year and a half to write this 200 pages of this first novel that I tried, but Still Life took me this version. When I discovered the first line, took me 7 days to write 37, 38 pages. I just went with it.
And you also mentioned one thing about the short story, that it revolves around specific political moments in Brazilian history. Where does politics play in your text? Is it important for you? And in what way is it how do you incorporate it, if it is, how do you incorporate it in your literary work?
I think that's everything about relationships and how people construct bridges and paths among themselves. And I think these big moments of political change, they have the potential of destroying the bridges or strengthen the communication and the bridges. And then I always think that this moment of crisis is a way of challenge the emotions of the characters. Are they still going to love each other? They're still going to talk to each other? Mostly they're going to start lying to each other. They're going to start believing things that they don't believe. So I was interested in these moments of truth, and then what changed from that moment on. And in the theater, because the theater is way more slimmer and compact and sharp, because the theater will really have to be sharp to the audience to understand what's happening, it's more visible because the character has a moment that he has to choose what he's going to do. And you think the large scale, like a society, like Brazilian society, decides in 1964, we are going to support the coup. But also this works in the personal level, because families are destroyed by these choices. So father going to choose to support something, and this changes the way their children react to their father, and how they can keep the memory of them if they change so much. And this is something that you find in, for example, Shakespeare is built totally on this moments of really deciding what are you going to do with an opportunity or situation, a social conflict that is just happening, and you really don't know what's going to happen from there. So I think the political moments for me are really about friendship and family when you write fiction, because you see how can shatter relationships that were very strong, and provokes you in a very it really produces a lot of language, these conflicts and these decisions. And for example, this play that you read, Hidden Garden, is really about this kid that's talking to this old man that he's almost a father figure. He's the best friend of his father. And he's really treading and asking about what happened, what kind of work they had. Even though they know, he understands that his father was working with torture during the dictatorship times. There's the conflict is, are you really going to destroy the father you have by knowing the truth? But the whole play works like this. And then the man tells him, just protect the good ghost. Because the moment you know the truth, it's you can't love your father anymore. And I think that this, in the political level, is very rich for writers, because the writers, of course, they can do big canvas, like Flaubert, for example. Sentimental education. It's really about the revolution, but the story is about the friendship of the two main characters. So, as each one decides to support a different political interpretation, and the bridge between them just shatters, and the whole novel is about this. So I think political times, they reveal a lot about what kind of relationship you have with people and the truth about people. If I can just talk about, like, you can, no need to go very far, like this last election of Bolsonaro in Brazil. It's a tragedy. It's a tragedy to everyone because Bolsonaro was very open about defending violence, killings, torturing, making jokes about rape, about black people. And a lot of families are destroyed. Because what you can do, how can you look at your father and the son of your father votes for Bolsonaro? I have a friend, she's a very great friend from college times, and since the election she does not talk with her father because she's a woman. And she asked her father, how can you vote for someone that is so entertained by the violence for women and rape? And her father told, oh, because he's right. And then after that, they don't talk. And so I'm telling you, of course I can imagine 20 years, books that will be about this decision and these families that are totally shattered. Like all the families are shattered now, including mine and from people that are close.
But I think that we know a bit of that from in this region. We are quite familiar with destroyed things. Can you turn off the phone, please? And but my question would be, what was the reception of your work? Because you obviously comment in this play. You obviously comment on the Brazilian history and the fact that what you told me, Brazilian society never confronted its own history of violence, and it never really laundered its dirty clothes, so in a way. So what was the reception of that play, and what is the reception of your work, of your literary work in Brazil?
I think that I come from, when you talk about Brazil, is complicated because Brazil is a continent. When you think of Croatia is very small. 4 million people, so it's small. But Brazil is 220 million people, and the country is huge. So when you talk about, people ask me to talk about Brazilian literature, I always feel that it's a responsibility that I can't really, I'm not up to, because it's really talking, it's almost someone asked, talk to me about European literature, because it's really huge, and each region has different language and different use of language and mostly different approach to express the experience. Like some regions, like the North, they are really great poets because they're really musical, and some regions, like from the South, they have this tradition of novels that they really look European because of migration, like German, Italian, and even Japanese. So you read the novels and you feel that there's this richness, it's continental. But I can talk about Rio, and in Rio we have this mythology of the city that's shattered in half. You have the South Zone that is where sophistication is, where culture is, where education is, and you have the suburbs that are just this proletarian place without any, how can I say, any production of knowledge. Like we were, sometimes I feel that they understand us just as zombies without any thought, any real thought. That goes beyond the cliche. But I grew up in a family that was very libertarian and free, and I never really were exposed in my family with this limitations. So my father bought me books, and when we saw movies on VHS, I remember that I have a very free access to the limited things that I have around me, but they were not really about hierarchies somehow, you know. And but for me it was a shock when I started to try to publish my first short stories, to see how judgmental and full of prejudice this chapter is, because it's almost like from my part of the city, you're just expected to write this very shallow, realistic novel, stories that are poorly written, with characters that they can't express themselves even with correct Portuguese. And you really find in the books that the writers from the suburbs, they have to write it wrong to be accepted. And then I never understood that. So of course I had a lot of problems with the establishment somehow, because they told me that I don't know the suburbs. So I remember that when I published my first story in an anthology that was about Rio, and they invited me to write about Madureira, that was my neighborhood. It was the first time I had a reveal, like my name mentioned it in a reveal. And the journalist says that it's a shame that the editors didn't select well the writers, and they mentioned me as a bad selection because it tells it's clear that Vinicius Jatoba does not know the suburbs. And he explains why. And what he explains is that that suburb that I'm describing does not exist. And I was shocked. And when Granta magazine got out, and it was super discussed, one review in particular was very striking for me, because the guy says that I put over complicated thoughts in very single-minded people, and it was a still life that I wrote when I was 22 years old. So you have this this conflict, because people can't really read, and as the main publishing houses are in Rio, it creates like a problem. Yeah.
But at the same time, you are in a double role here. You are also a literary critic. You write book reviews, and you're also a film critic. So what does it look like from that side, from when you look at the literary production as a literary critic, and when you look at the establishment or the milieu as a literary critic in that milieu? What is the landscape like?
I think that it's very small, because we don't have, Brazil now has just 4 national newspapers. So if you think about that mainstream newspapers, they don't give a lot of space for culture anywhere, so you don't have space for books. And so it's a very provincial somehow, you know, and I think it is. But what happened with me, like how did I got to should because like even though I didn't publish it, my books in big publishing house, I wrote in the most important newspapers and magazines and websites of Brazil. I started as writing in underground media newspaper that we printed in this bohemian neighborhood called Santa Teresa in Brazil. And I remember that I had to go after the surviving of the magazine by selling the copies. So we published the newspaper and I go around just selling to people, which was fun for me. It was 21, 22. It was just selling. And it was like sell newspaper and drink a beer, sell newspaper and drink a beer. So it was very fun. But as it is very small, and the bars of people that editors, they go there. I sold this newspaper very cheap and without knowing to the editors of the newspapers. And they always asked me, "What's your name?" And I, Vinicius Jatoba. And Jatoba is a very different name in Brazil. And people just have this, they remember. So when I discovered that I could have a blog, and I started like a web page called Compulsive Reader, I started publishing every 4 days a review. That was my challenge. So every 4 days I had a review. I was really writing, and this was before social media. People were really reading it and sending to other people through email, like emailing to other people. And suddenly I received this invitation from a newspaper that does not even exist anymore, inviting me to write. And the editor told me, it's so good that I found in the internet your contact because you sold me this newspaper 3 times and I never got your contact, so I found it on the internet and he invited me. And since I wrote this first review in this big newspaper, it was just natural, like people just keep inviting me. And then I never have any problem because, first because I had passion. Really, I really love to write a book review. I think it's a huge responsibility, to create these passages and to deliver these books to people that can. I think it's a responsibility, but also it's a lot of fun. It's fun. It's really fun to deal with timelines and the space and also to understand, which I'm very good at, what kind of language we use in each space. Because one of the things that I feel my colleagues of criticism in Brazil, they have a hard time dealing with, is how to negotiate the writing with the space that you're writing. So I knew that if I was invited to this venue that's about essays and they want something more sophisticated, so the language is more sophisticated. But if I'm writing for this magazine that, among other things, they sell clothes and like furniture, I know that the language is different. So I was just always writing and understanding the language of each space by doing what? Like when I was invited to a magazine, I would buy 10 numbers of this magazine and I would study the language with a pencil and understanding the language of the magazine. And then I would use that
And what is the, I mean, we had a colloquium today and we spoke today most of the time about the position of the literary critic or the art critic in general in Croatian or in the Balkan countries. What is that status for art critic in Brazil? And from your own experience, obviously, you kind of had your own personal strategy how to get involved in the field, how to, in a way, realize your ambition to be a literary critic, to write about books. But what is the position of the critic in that landscape, in the mainstream media or in the underground media, as you call them, or in professional magazines or literary journals and magazines?
I think that there's a clear division in Brazil between critics that are involved with universities and critics that are really, they call militants, militant journalists, that is really writing about in the newspapers and magazines and such. I actually I was doing most of my adult life research in college. I went to study and to make like a master and PhD, and I was very serious about that. But I never really got involved with this war. Because sometimes there's a war, and sometimes there are polemics where one attacks the other, and I never really care about this because I love two things. I love imagination at work, a writer that finds a way of expressing something. And it's very exciting when you open a book and you discover that someone is doing something that just this person could do, and he do it very well. And I like to engage with this emotion that the creator has. So I respect for this. And I love reading. I think there are a lot of pleasures in life, but one of the most intense pleasures in life is reading. You know, because reading is really about empower yourself to be more than yourself. And last week I was reading some of the historical plays of Shakespeare, and while I was reading that, I was not Vinicius Jatoba. I was doing other things. I was listening to Falstaff. I was listening to Prince Harry, and I was there. And I really respect this moment. So I really want to connect this peculiar imagination to the imagination of the reader and make them find a common ground to start their relationship, mostly because it's a very intimate relationship. To read, you are in silence. It's a really physical activity, and you use all your archive of not just of reading, intellectual archive, but your emotions, and you use your pain, your bliss, to just have access to the emotions of the text. And this is about all fields, like with painting, with music. We use our archive, and we need to be available. And so I never have this problem, because it seems like for me that the militant journalists and the critics of the college, they were also a fight between reason and use of thought and high culture, and this very improvised way of reading, passionate, irresponsible. It's almost like responsibility against irresponsibility. And for me, you really need both of them equally to have access to a text at its fullest. If you just use reason, and calculation, you can't really enter the text. One of my intellectual and emotional passions is Borges. And I think that the best of Borges is his literary criticism. He really loves the books. He loves them, and he just he have almost a physical relationship with typo, the fonts and paper and covers and library, and he finds great things to tell of the worst books possible, which is very interesting too, because some of the best essays of Borges are about books that no one reads. So what about the book is alive, but the book itself, nobody reads the book.
And okay, I don't know if anybody wants to intervene. Please do at any point when you feel like it. But when you talk about writing about the way that Borges wrote about the book, so where would you place the position of the literary critic? Because you said that you write about books that you are passionate about, which I presume, but correct me if I'm wrong, is that you write about the books that you like. Is that correct, or do you write about the books that you don't like, but then you are inspired by those books in a way? I'm asking this, just to explain, I'm asking this because we have here, as you said, Croatia is a small country, so we have here a very specific situation where art critics wouldn't write negatively about somebody's work because they know the artist, so they don't want to get into conflict with an artist. And it has been something that art critics talk about as a problem for them. And then on the other hand, you have other art critics that would condemn a certain artwork or a book or a theater play if they don't like it, or if they find it not good enough. But then they would be ostracized by the milieu. Then they would be ostracized by the artists or by the publishing houses or theaters or whatever they wrote about. How would you? What is your experience with that? I mean,
it can sound very blunt, but I don't think that like or dislike a book is enough to engage with it emotionally or intellectually, you know? Because I dislike selling books. I dislike Celine as a person. I dislike him. And but when I read him, I'm not using liking or disliking as an access to the book. You know? Like I don't feel this. So like or dislike, there are politics of the professional world, and their ambitions. Of course, if you're a literary critic in Brazil, and then you think, I'm going to survive, what do you want to do? You want to be judged of prices, you know? You want to be involved with editorial selections, and then this can make you very hypocrite, because you want to, when you use actually writing as a political agenda to achieve something that has nothing to do with literary criticism in the first place. You're playing a game of positioning in society that has nothing to do with the two things that I told you before, right? The passion of imagination, the passion of reading. This has nothing to do with that anymore. And in Brazil, it's very deformed somehow. I think that the prices in Brazil, if you think of the best books that Brazil have published in the last 15 years, just 10% of them won the prizes. Because the prizes goes to people, let's imagine that something like this can happen also in Croatia, and it can happen in France, it can happen in a lot of places. You know?
I think we had a question here. So
Yes,
sorry.
I was the one who. So I think your question was more directly. It would be said like, is there? And maybe I didn't understand the answer. You were talking now about literary criticism in Brazil, like playing a game and criticizing politics and that. But is there? I think that the question was, is there negative literary criticism in Brazil, or because here we don't have that? What Miljenka wanted to say. Is there a negative criticism itself to the literary work of someone, if anyone?
But then, like, personally speaking, you know, I had a space in a newspaper to write about. And then, what's good about writing a bad review of a bad book?
Or a good review of a bad book. I mean, but
but I'm talking
saying
about
that it's a bad book.
but I'm talking about. I never wrote a good review of a bad book because I read the book first, and then I think the book is not good enough. I find a good book. Do you know why? Because the space is very limited. I'm talking about a precarious situation. I know that's very sexy to find yourself into polemics. And you can write bad things and people will comment you. But as a precarity of space in Brazil for writing about books, I think it's worth to find books that had the qualities that I'm looking at when I read books. And just use the opportunity that I have to make readers know these books, mostly because the majority of my reviews of Brazilian literature are about books that are published for 300 copies in a publishing house in the north of Brazil that nobody will ever hear about. So why would I write a bad review of a novel written by, I don't know, a celebrity, when I can just push a great book of poems that was published in Amazon, and nobody will ever know about it. Of course, it would be, if I think career-wise, to make polemics, would be better to write the fasting review of a book that everyone expects you to write good things about. But as someone that loves good books, I really want to push the books that I'm passionate about. And I think that it costs nothing for me to really look at the books this way. So when I think that there are writers in Brazil that I can say, today they are publishing in big publishing houses. But their first review was written by me when they published like the 200 copies paid by, you know. And that was the first review they ever had in the big newspaper. So I think that is this is something that I made a choice. Most because of the precarity of it. You think about United States, what is a review in the forest of venues and magazines of United States? I was actually a writer in the United States can be very snobbish. If you like go to web pages, they have like this, they can choose because they have so many reviews. They have 80 reviews. But in Brazil, you just have 4 national newspapers. So it's, I think it's very precarious. And if I can choose a book, why not choose the book that would for me make a difference, you know? And would challenge, mostly would challenge the choices of the big publishing houses too. Because then it's like this, I'm choosing a great novel that the writer has to pay from his own pocket, while the big publishing houses are publishing this kind of. So it's also, I think that's also a critique of how it is working, you know. And I'm very proud of that. Some writers now that well known, their first review was with me, and I can tell this that I'm actually proud of that. You know?
Do you think that then, in that context of big publishing houses and small media market, that the critic stance, the choice that the critic makes, is a political choice?
Yeah, but also is something that how you're going to use. I have no doubt that the critic has power. So when you get to a point that your editor calls you and tells, Vinicius, what is going to be your next review? It's a moment of truth. What's going to be? I can choose any book that I want, but I choose the book that I like and I think is important, instead of trying to find with other critics to get the biggest book possible, which would make me more well-known, because people will talk about the book, but for me, I'm not doing what I'm supposed to do, you know.
Are there any other comments or questions? No? I think that I would like to ask my last question, and that is, how does the literary work of yours inform your professional critic career, or vice versa? How does your criticism or professional reading of books inform your writing?
Well, I think that first you have to be always reading, and it can sound strange, but there are a lot of critics that don't read at all. They never read books. They never read. What book are you reading?
They review them.
No, they just review the books that they're assigned to. But I'm talking that when you talk about literary criticism, and it's not really just about the book that you're writing about. It's about going to the bookstore and asking the clerk, can you show me what's not here in the counter, but what's hidden? And then you discover these books, and then you read these books, because it's not really just about the book that's offered to you through the publishing house. It's also going and trying to discover like hidden books in the bookstore. Yeah? So I feel that this makes me read all the time, right? And then you have to go and read and go to the like we have bookstores that they have shares. So I just go to the bookstore, get 2 books, and just read at the bookstore. So I'm always reading, and this is important. Also, I think the other effect that I could give, that's important for me, it really increases your respect for the work of writing somehow, because then you understand how fragile it is, how confusing it is, but mostly how naive it is, because there are so many books being published. The chance of someone reading your book is so low, of being reviewed is so mysterious, capricious, and you still sit down and write a book. And then you start to respect more this activity, you know, because I don't think that when I read a bad book, I don't have a feeling of, I have a feeling actual respect, because somehow this guy worked 2 years in something that's bad, but he made this for probably the right reason. And then I think as a writer, this challenges your arrogance to other people's work, and I think that is very, this is very special. No, and just and also in the other part of my life as a critic, which was in the university, of course I researched there things that I would research without being there anyway. For example, Fahrenheit discourse, the implications of history and narrative, and also the ideology and how ideology deforms vocabulary. I did this in my master's degree. When I was in PhD, I researched fiction inside, the use of fiction inside the newspapers, how fiction can be used in the newspapers, and what's truth and what's not truth. So if you read like my plays and the short stories, somehow they are also, they have a dialogue with the things that I researched and wrote essays about. Even when I wrote about other writers, I was thinking about what I'm doing as a writing artist. So I think it's very fruitful, and it's very formative in a positive way, enriching in a formative way. And of course, there's a group of critics they're studying, I don't know, they're working with, and I feel that it's very difficult to talk to such an audience, because of course there's an element of pride in doing literary criticism, which is you really need to believe in your view of the activity, the way you understand it. So I think this can be very challenging to talk to people that work with in the field, because of course they think that the way they do it is the better way. So there's like this clash, and there's this and there's this defense, and there's this, how can I say, lack of common idiom that exists when a critic does well his work. So it's almost like a recipe for your own success in life that cannot be shared.
Yeah, it's individual for everybody. Well, if there aren't any questions, I would like to thank you. And I would invite you to ask your questions if you had them and didn't want to ask them publicly, to ask Vinicius after this event. So thank you very much. I just wanted to say that Vinicius will have a workshop, right?
Yeah.
Soon. When is it?
It starts tomorrow.
Tomorrow. And So workshop
Yeah.
on
Like theater writing. It's
theater
going to be
writing.
2 meetings, and I'm very passionate about this. That's why I was reading Shakespeare last week. I was looking for scenes to use in the second meeting. And I'm just going to deconstruct some scenes that I love and I think are very beautifully tightly constructed. And we're just going to talk about some details of how to build tension and conflict. Of course, I'm not really willing to teach people how to write dialogue, because I understand that nowadays we are very fluent in dialogue. In a sense, we devour dialogue all the time, through podcasts, through series, through movies, through talk shows, reality shows. We are very fluent in dialogue. So, and I think that each one will learn by himself or herself, how to write their own peculiar dialogue. But there are some common grounds of how dramatic tension works, and I'm going to show them, talk to people, and try to discover things with them using texts of Harold Pinter, David Mamet, Beckett, and for sure Shakespeare, of course, because
You can't escape Shakespeare. Well, thank you. And I also wanted to mention that Vinicius' short story will soon be published on Booksi's website in English, so you will be able to read his work in English. Once again, thank you very much for